Now I can. There we go. We're recording. Okay. So this is the Juneau-Gastineau Rotary Club meeting, December 10th, and I'm Amy Lujan. And today I'm pleased to introduce and welcome today's speaker, my friend, Matthew Temple. And I've known Matthew for over 40 years. Yikes. We grew up together in Northbrook, Illinois, and we both went to college in Massachusetts, so we kept our connection going. And since then, Matthew has become one of the best traveled people I know. It's been fun to track him, and we've had the opportunity to meet in various locations around the world. One thing I admire about Matthew is that he found a job that really matches his love of travel, and he's conducted career workshops literally all over the world. He's also been working virtually for years, sort of ahead of the curve on that one, including from my living rooms in both Nome and Juneau. He's been up here several times to visit. So I'm looking forward to learning more about what's going on in the world of work as we go through these changing times. So I'd like to invite Matthew to share his presentation and get started. Thanks for being here, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. And I'm delighted to join you and actually delighted to come back. I have been to one or two Rotary meetings in Juneau. So I'm actually getting to come back, which is fun. Let me share my screen. Oh, it's actually disabled. I think the host has to enable me to share, and it's not a big deal if
Julie's fixing it up now.
Okay. Here we go. Let's go here. Let's go to the start. There we go. Let me go full screen. And I won't try to hit you over the head with too many slides, but I thought it might be helpful as we talk through a couple of things. So as Amy has mentioned, I kind of wear two hats. I work at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, where I run alumni career and professional development, and then also serve as an executive coach to clients at companies. And so what I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to try to keep it brief and just keep it a little bit more open to questions, so it's a little bit more interactive, is just managing your career during a pandemic, and what should you be thinking about. And this could either be for you, or I know many of us have family members who are doing this right now and might be struggling. So managing your career can be a roller coaster in the best of times, and during a pandemic even more so. So it can be a roller coaster. But the issue is not everyone likes roller coasters. So that's actually me in seat number 3, not maybe having the best time in the world. And I've got it in front of me is actually my college roommate, actually Cosimo, who Amy knows. And in seat number 1 is his son, who is definitely having a much better time than I am. And I'm going to make it even worse. This was actually at the log ride at Disneyland, so it wasn't some enormous roller coaster. A couple of 7-year-olds had to talk me down afterwards. So there's a lot of up and downs, when you're managing your career, as I think all of us know. And so what I wanted to talk about, what have been some of the effects of the pandemic? And Amy sort of talked about, in particular, how are people dealing with this mid-career? It's been tough. When you think about it, I think for most of us, there's probably been 3 very significant economic dislocations in the last 20 years. There was sort of the dot-com meltdown in early 2000. I lost my job in that meltdown, and I was working in an internet startup, and that was tough for a lot of people. And then there was the financial crisis, housing crisis in 2008. And this really dwarfs either of them, when you look at how it's really affected people. And, and I've seen this really close up, and I'm sure everyone has seen it, either personally or through family members or through friends. And, I was thinking through some of the people that I've been coaching in industries in particular that were hard hit. I'm coaching, a couple people who work incorporated health clubs like an Equinox and Soul Cycle. And those clubs were, either some have been shut down the whole time or much of the time. And, my first career was an investment banker, and we would do a lot of financial models going out 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And typically, a downturn might be 5 to 7%. Well, they had 100% downturn in some of these industries, or 90%. When you're, Equinox has about 300 locations if you had an Equinox Soul Cycle. But when you shut down clubs, you could do a little bit online, but basically revenue went down 90%. And no one's ever really modeled for that. Same in travel. I've coached people working in the hotel industry, the airline industry, United, American Airlines, car rentals, again, where revenue was down 90% at some points and going into bankruptcy, restaurants as well, movie theaters. I just saw a graphic the other day. Ticket sales in movie theaters normally would have been running about $11 billion through the current year. It's at $2 billion. So that's also down, 80 something percent. Education as well. And so for in some of these, the jobs are coming back. So I don't want to paint a totally bleak picture, but people have had to kind of shift a little bit and think about other things. And I also want to, there have been opportunities as well. And, where we've seen those opportunities the most have been, I used to buy 2 things a year from Amazon, and it's a lot more right now. And so there's been a lot of opportunities at Instacart in terms of fulfillment, at Amazon, at UPS. Big tech is still hiring. I've been coaching a lot of people who have been getting jobs, have been interviewing virtually, getting onboarding virtually at big tech companies, whether it's Apple and Facebook and Netflix and places like that. FinTech has been a good opportunity. And healthcare, I do a lot of coaching in global healthcare companies, and they're still hiring. I was expecting that my executive coaching business would crater, and it hasn't. And in particular, healthcare has remained very, very strong. So what are some of the new skills required? One thing that's definitely going to be required, particularly, is just being very comfortable working in a virtual environment. Interviewing is all virtual. So being really comfortable. I'll do a lot of training on Zoom. How do you get ready for that interview on Zoom? How do you make sure that you're at your best? I'm standing right now, so I'll talk through people about how do you make sure you've got good frontal lighting. I'm even using a lapel mic right here, which makes it easier. How do you stand to get energy? But so some of the skills required, just even on the interview, just being very comfortable in a virtual environment, working virtually, working collaboratively, using collaborative software with people, onboarding virtually is going to be important. All of those things, are very important, as well as, changing industries. So whether it's learning new technologies as well. And then finally, what are some of the permanent changes of this? We may not know that for a while, in terms of all of the permanent changes. I think, a couple that come to mind right away is how do we, one, it's opened up a lot of opportunities. I'm in Los Angeles and I'm presenting to the Juneau Gastineau Rotary Club. And so it's interesting. My team has been virtual for 15 years. But even for us, we've become more decentralized. My home now is a Zoom studio where I'll do webinars for 1,500 people, or lead job search groups of 150 people. And so I think, one of the changes is I think a lot of people coming out of this may be making a lot of life decisions. Do we move back closer to family? Do we move to a less expensive city? And I think there's a lot of that's possible. I live in LA, where it's not uncommon that people spend 2 to 3 hours a day commuting. That looks like madness now, as you reflect back on 9 months. And it's not like people are going to completely stop working from the office, but is it going to be as structured as it was? And I think that'll be really interesting to see how that changes. And then I just wanted to leave you just with some mindsets. Again, this could be for you or family or friends. One of the big mantras that we really try to tell people is you've got to own your own career. You're the CEO of your own career. Nobody cares more about your career than you will, except maybe your mom. And so you've got to take ownership of that. You know, and you have to be intentional about it. I think the second thing is leveraging communities and networks. Um, I think one of the things that happens and probably becomes accentuated in a pandemic is people become reactive. You know, it's very easy to look through and say, okay, so today was a great day. I saw 10 job listings at Indeed. I applied to all 10. I've got an Excel spreadsheet and I can click off 10 boxes and that's a great day. It isn't, it isn't. Um, is anyone going to see you? You know, I always tell people, absolutely apply for a job, but your walkaway assumption has to be that a living, breathing human being will never see that. And that doesn't mean you don't apply, but then how do you network in there? So how do you, you know, getting in front of people is important. So while you might have a sense of accomplishment that you sent out 10 resumes and cover letters, that one Zoom networking call you had with a former colleague could have been worth 45. And so you really have to have a balance. How do you get in front of people? Getting in front of people and cutting through the clutter is just so important. And I'll give you an example of it. I had to hire an assistant, you know, a few years ago, and my colleague and I, who were going to be sharing the role, we have a very antiquated application HR system at HR, and which I had never used. So we got in front of his laptop and we had to click in to look at the resume, click to print, click back out, click back in, print the cover letter, click back out. We finally went through all of the applicants, all 20 of them. And I said, oh, that's great. You know, that was an hour. We're done finally. He said, no. That was screen one of 20 screens. We have 380 more. And I said, no, we don't. I don't have time to look through the other 380. I don't have time. So if you take that as an example, 380 people were never looked at. So who got looked at? It was the first 20. And that's actually who I hired my assistant out of, but also anyone who networked in. Anyone who knew about that, knew someone who worked at Kellogg, who sent a resume to me I looked at and probably spoke with. And that's why networking is so important. Second mindset, it's important to have structure. If you're looking for a job is a job. How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to track your time? How do you make sure you're getting the best ROI back on the time that you're investing? So whether it's a spreadsheet to track conversations, applications, that becomes really important. The fourth thing, crafting your message. It's funny, I'm actually training someone right now who's got an interview starting in an hour. And it's important to be intentional about your message. I've got a little pea brain. I can only fit 3 things into my little pea brain. What are the 3 things you want me to know about you? And more importantly, how do they connect with the job you're applying to? That's going to be really important. And so being intentional about the message, looking at the job description in the company and thinking really proactively, this person's only going to remember 3 things about me. What are the 3 things that they're going to remember? I was talking with someone yesterday who has been in sales and he's done really well, but he wants to be a general manager. And he said, well, but everyone keeps putting me in this sales box. And I was looking through his resume. I said, but the first word on your resume is that you're a sales executive. Why don't you talk about how you're a leader who's worked in sales rather than branding yourself as a sales executive? The 5th one, just being positive. It's important to stay positive because the energy, the enthusiasm, it's really important to convey that, particularly in a virtual setting, and staying positive. And as we said in the roller coaster, there are ups and downs. And you know what? If you've gone through 4 rounds of interviews and you just got dinged by a company, take a day off. Go for a hike, go for a walk, binge something fun on TV. Take a day off, but then you got to hit the ground running the next day. And so just being positive is important. And that sort of leads to the 6th one. Focus on what you can control. It's so easy to get into a negative feedback loop. And one of the things that becomes really important, I think one of the things that's been very humbling about this pandemic is there's a lot of things we have no power over at all. I have 87-year-old parents living on the other side of the country that I haven't been able to see, and that's probably the best thing I can do for them right now. I can't control that. I can't control what's going to happen to the stock market. I used to not let people watch CNBC during the big downturn. You've got to focus on what you have control over. You have control over staying positive. You have control over how you react. You have control over these other things, crafting your message, being intentional. And those other things you don't have control over, you have to put to one side. Having a learning and growth mindset is really important, particularly for people. I'm in my mid-50s. You've got to show that you're agile, that you're learning and growing, and you're learning new things. And that's also important. When I was hiring my assistant several years ago, she had a great resume. In fact, I didn't think she'd want to work for us because we couldn't pay enough money. And she convinced me of that. And I asked her, I said, how are you at pivot tables? And I was trying to figure out, like, how honest was she being about what she knew, what she didn't. And I loved her answer. She said, I've never done a pivot table in Excel, but my husband's really good at it. I like to learn. And so I'll learn it and I'll pick it up before I start. And I loved her answer because I knew when she gave that answer, she was being very truthful about everything else probably on her resume. So that's who I hired. And, about a month into the job, she said, so where are all these pivot tables? I said, there's no pivot tables. She's like, what do you mean? You talked about all these pivot tables. I'm like, nah, I was just trying to figure out, like, how honest you were. And I said, I loved your answer because you showed me you had a learning and growth mindset. You showed me you were going to be intentional and take control over it. And that's who I wanted to hire. She's like, there's no pivot tables. I'm like, we're not that complicated. Don't worry about it. And then the final one, get outside yourself. There are going to be a lot of ups and downs. So, it's important whether it's going for a hike, going for a walk, socially distanced gathering with friends, volunteering, giving back. We can get stuck inside our heads so much when there is career uncertainty. And I think sometimes getting outside of yourself can be really important. And I just added in a couple more slides and then I'll stop sharing so we can look at each other a little bit more. One of the workshops that we've been doing, I do a Designing Your Life workshop, which we've done about 35 times around the world. So as Amy said, this is a workshop we've done in New York, Boston, DC, Miami, London, Amsterdam, Brussels. We were supposed to go to China and Singapore. We've converted it digitally now, and it's been super interactive with Zoom breakout rooms. And so it uses a lot of design thinking to help people start to think about what's next and do some very fun exercises. We've been doing a lot of virtual happy hours for alum. It's been really important for alumni to connect with other people, and Zoom has made that really easy to do. We've been doing a lot of virtual job search groups for alumni. In fact, we just finished leading the world's largest job search group. An invitation that was supposed to be sent to a few thousand people was accidentally sent to 65,000 people. So we just did a 135-person job search group with people calling in from, Chicago and the West Coast, but also Greece and Mexico and Germany and Singapore. And again, Zoom has made that really, really easy. And then we've been doing a lot of industry networking. It's a strange time to be networking and getting in front of people. So we've really tried to do a lot of networking by industry via Zoom. So let me stop there and happy to kind of open it up to questions.
Does anybody want to go ahead and unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, this is Doug. I have a question. So when you're talking about careers, I saw your people around the tables. Do you give different advice for older people than you do younger people?
I would tell you that 90% of the advice is the same. So here's maybe two areas where I might differentiate a little bit. I think one, for that person who's older, and legally ageism in the US starts at age 40. So, old can be different. My brother was a trader and you're old at 35 there, or as an athlete. But one or two things that would be different. One, sell me on how your experience is going to be important. People will sometimes push back and say, you know, aren't you a little overqualified for this? And one of the best pushbacks I ever heard, and it was from Abby Kohut, who writes something called Ask Abby, said, well, you know, if you were on a flight, you know, from Juneau to Vancouver, would you want anyone flying that plane, or maybe Sully Sullenberger flying that plane, you know, who might be a little overqualified? And so tell me that you bring some things to the table that someone else wouldn't. So I think you might get, you know, and I'll get asked, like, is there ageism? You bet there is. So are you going to change your age? No. But then how do you lead with energy? How do you lead with enthusiasm? And you can convey some of that by researching the company, by being very thoughtful about why you want to be there, by connecting with people there. That's going to be important. And then finally, show me you have a learning and growth mindset. What have you learned recently? What are you, you know, I ended up getting another master's a couple years ago, and it pushed me out of my comfort zone to learn 20 new technologies. So show me how you've kind of learned a lot of new things to stay current.
Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
Who else has questions? Rosemary?
So what do you tell people, and when you're talking about ageism, what do you tell people about technology and staying current? I mean, the thing about, I would just say there are certain aspects of technology, and from my perspective, that if you don't use them all the time, you lose it. And so many changes happen and so many updates that sometimes it's, if you're not in that particular arena all the time, your skills don't stay up to date. But that doesn't mean that you don't bring other qualities to the table. So what do you tell people about that?
Well, I think one is just practice, you know, and learn. You know, even so I think about yesterday, I was on 4 different video platforms between Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, and Google Meet. And I was trying to get a client ready using Google Meet. And I said, look, instead of doing a Zoom call, we're going to do it on Google Meet. You've got to get comfortable with this. Like, I don't like the platform as much as Zoom, you know, and he's, you know, young, well, 40-ish, but he's got to get comfortable with it. And you know, and that's important. And so, but can you practice with a friend? You know, I didn't want him to be doing that for the first time on the interview where he's not going to be at his best. I'm like, we need to start practicing now because there's certain limitations on this and you've got to be comfortable. And so I think you can practice. I think, look, one of the great things right now is there's a wealth of resources out there where you can go within LinkedIn. If you have a premium membership, LinkedIn had bought lynda.com some years ago. There's a lot of free stuff you can access on LinkedIn on how to practice. You know, or you can take a MOOC or an online class. So I think there's a lot of ways to get more comfortable. And, you know, even in a company, you know, people earlier in their career can be great to mentor people who are mid-career. You know, when I had to go back and get my master's, in some ways it was humbling, but a good experience. Normally I'm used to maybe managing millennials or Gen X. I had to learn from them. But I had to put my pride to one side because they had a lot of things that they could teach me.
Oh yeah. I mean, when in need, call a grandkid, you know, that's they're born knowing what to do. And it's interesting that this pandemic has sort of catapulted us into a whole bunch of new technologies. And I use the example in just being on Zoom for Rotary. You know, Julie Olson called me up and said, we're going to do a practice session and it's happening today and we're on Zoom tomorrow. And now I live half my life on Zoom. And all those other platforms that you have mentioned are now on my equipment. So I just, you know, you just have to do it. You just have to move in and do it, I guess.
No, it's the right thing. And look, I was talking to my dad, through Zoom yesterday. My dad's 87, and I think I said, no, just click the link, Dad. No, just the link. No, just click. It's but it's okay.
Yeah.
Who else has any questions? Amy.
Oh, Matthew, one of the groups I'm thinking about a lot, because I have a niece who's a senior in high school, those kids that are, getting ready to go to school, and it's going to be weird probably. And I'm just wondering how to think about that challenge of selecting a school and what you're going to come out with on the other side. I mean, are there any changes to that sort of decision-making process that you think would be important to think about for a career going forward?
Great question. I think what's a little different, than when we went to school, we rarely had, and it may have been, that I studied history versus other things. We rarely had group projects. So how do you kind of get team skills and group skills where you're going? And I think colleges have been much more, and even high schools have been much more intentional about, making sure that students get that. But I think that's important. I would still say study what you love. I think people always do better when they're doing something that they're passionate about and interested in. But then how do you maybe work some practical things into that? So like my nephew graduated from college 4 years ago, and he was a undergraduate business major, but he got a minor in computer science. And he didn't want to, there was never going to be his strength, but it was able to sort of show some technical prowess and some flexibility. And, it helped him get it. So he ended up going into investment banking, but covering tech. And it sort of said, he does have some interest and knowledge of tech, even though he wasn't going to be an engineer.
Great. Any other questions? I'll go to the second page here. Anybody on this side? All right, Matt, I have another question. Do you do career development for like not only businesses and things of that nature, but plumbers, carpenters, high steel workers, things of that nature, people that work in that type of industry?
Yeah, I have it. One of the, I was talking a little bit about designing your life, which uses design thinking to help people maybe reimagine what they might do or do something different. I've actually been helping some friends, and we're actually doing this in jails in Illinois. So people who have been in jail, and helping them think through, well, how would they design their lives? And, there was one person who I didn't work with, but my friend was telling me this story where he was involved in a DUI and he killed someone. And he's, really wanted to change, and coming out of that, he wanted to start a landscaping business. And so then how would you move into something like that? And how would you imagine that? And how would you design that? And he didn't have money to start something like that. And he was thinking, well, I can't start a landscaping business until I get a truck and all this equipment. And she was saying, you don't need that. Maybe at the beginning, it's just like a lawnmower and a rake and something else, and you work up to that. And so don't make that barrier so high, if that's something you're going into. And so, I've talked to people about that all the time. And even a lot of times people that are making very big transitions, talking to someone who had been in the military and how to take, that experience is all around leadership. And then how do you take that, but then pivot into a very different direction? And how do you think about what are some of those transferable skills that you can use? And even, and even for that plumber, for that electrician, you're still, how do you get business? Well, you're kind of being interviewed by customers. Are they going to hire you? And what's your message? Are you Are you on time? Are you reliable? Do you have other references for things that you've done? I mean, how you market that really isn't any different in the end.
Great. Candy.
I'd say that's, because we're a mechanical contractor, and Dick has sat on the apprenticeship board for many, many, many years. Well, we have an employee now who came in through the sheet metal union, and he is a terrific service guy. But we found out not too long ago that he had applied initially to be a plumber apprentice. And, his interview, Dick didn't even remember having interviewed him. That in the trades too, some interview skills are really pretty critical. And what you were saying is really is important. What makes you stand out? What makes you memorable? Because when they open once a year and they create a list of apprentices and they rank them from that interview and from their their applications, and when there are openings for apprentices and a shop takes them in, they work down that list. So it isn't just coming in. Right now, we've taken one in that we didn't have any apprentices on the list, and took a guy in who's coming to us from Tlingit Haida, and he's working out really, really well. We said, well, we'll give you 2 weeks. We'll see how things are. And then we'll see if we can't get into the apprenticeship program because we have no apprentices on the list. Tremendously good worker, real nice kid, came in, interviewed well for this kind of a opening that happened right away. But, what makes you memorable? Why is this a good path for you? And both of those guys now at this juncture are able to do that. But those skills, whether you're going into a white collar profession or a blue collar one, are really important.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's interesting. As I was doing interview prep this week for someone he's been at a very, very big company, for a number of years, and he wants to move into a startup. And, and I said, you have to understand, and I was trying to give him this mental image. I said, the people interviewing, they've got their arms crossed like this. They're kicking the tires and they've got their arms crossed. And I said, and you've got to anticipate what are their reservations. And remember, I said, they may not tell you their reservations. And so I said, so if I'm looking at hiring you, my concern would be, you've worked at a really big company. Why do you want to be at a startup? Are you going to roll up your sleeves? Are you going to be good with that? And I said, so even if I don't ask that, you need to take that doubt out of my mind. And you've got to go in with that mindset. I said, he's like, well, they don't always ask that. I'm like, but that doubt is there. And so how do you change that in my mind proactively? I said, you can't count. Most people who do the interviewing, they're actually, interviewing you. They're not actually good at it. They don't like it, and they don't spend any time preparing for it. Which is typically why that first question is, tell me about yourself, because I don't know anything about you. I haven't read your resume. And so you've got to go in with an agenda of, what are the 3 things I want to get across?
I think that's really good advice.
John.
Yeah, one of the questions, I guess this is a broader question, would be, a lot of us have been engaged in education over the years, and one of the things I would ask you is, looking at these enormous changes in the workforce and so on, what would be your recommendations as we come out of the pandemic in terms of changes to our educational system, whether it be K-12 or the university system, to meet the needs ongoing? Because it looks like there's a large number of jobs that are going to be disappearing in this new environment.
And there always have. When you look at the number of jobs that disappeared at the last turn of the century, 100 years ago, it was probably even bigger. And so I think, maybe the biggest thing is, I think we often think about, okay, I just get education from age, 6 to 21 or 24, and then I'm done. That's not true anymore. I think it was the president of AT&T said some years ago, all of my employees need to be spending 5 to 10 hours a week learning, because you're going to lose skill. You've got to constantly be learning and pivoting and learning new things. And so how do we sort of get that across, that it's not, you always have to have this learning and growth mindset. I think all of us, I run my life with a to-do list, an Excel spreadsheet. And one of the things I'll challenge people to think about is, okay, that's great, but what's on your to-learn list? Like, what are you planning to learn the next few months, the next year, the next 5 years? That becomes really important as well. So I don't know necessarily it's so much as changing the system as it is changing the mindset maybe within the system.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you very much for coming. It's you had a great presentation. I'm looking forward to my next career, which is going to be on a beach with a Corona daily. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And